2006 Errazuriz wild yeast Chardonnay from Casablanca. This is the first one we're going to come to that actually has some oak to it. It sees fermentation as well as oak aging. It sees surly, which is that stirring on the leaves to give it a more biscuity viscosity. And it sees something which I didn't talk about, which is called wild ferment. If anyone's ever made beer, they would know that yeast is a very important component to the flavor of your beer. Well, it's also, and it's a component to bread as well. It's a very important component when it comes to wine. It's not often spoken about, at least commercially. But if you've ever met a winemaker, they are nuts about their yeast, because there are yeast strains that are literally formed to emphasize flavors, to de-emphasize others, to work with cool climate fruit, to not work with warm climate, to retain acidity, to hold sugars, to handle high alcohols. There is a smorgasbord of yeast that you can work with that have all been farmed and are cultured and are sitting in a nice little catalog you can buy from UC Davis. But the old school mentality is you use whatever nature gives you. And you use what's in the vineyards, and you use what's in the winery, and you let Mother Nature take its course, and don't mess with it. And so you bring the grapes in from the vineyards, you crush them, put them in a tank, and walk away. And yeast will eventually come to its, course, and it'll ferment. The theory goes if you use native yeast, you're getting more of the true essence of what the wine is, more of the purity of the wine. There's a savory kind of core yeasty texture and flavor that you get in using native yeast versus kind of a cultured yeast. The risk you run, though, are if your yeast doesn't finish fermenting your wine and you end up with a stuck fermented wine, the risk is you end up with a wine that you have to dump, or you have to make it a dessert wine, because to restart a stuck fermented wine is really hard to do and takes a lot of manipulating that can absolutely strip the flavors of the wine. And so, there's risk reward there, but these guys really feel that wild yeast adds to what you're getting here. Let's give it a taste and see what we think. This wine's interesting to me, and it's in its place for a reason. It sees 10 months of oak. It sees French oak. 17% of it's new. It sees that native yeast, and it sees surly. So on paper, it has a lot. On paper, it says it's going to kick you in your teeth with this over-aggressive flavor, in contrast to the two no-oak Chardonnays we had. But I actually would think this is quite a graceful wine. And so it brings up a point that I should discuss, which is the raw resource. If Mother Nature delivers a really high-quality fruit for you, you can throw as much oak as you want to it, as much, relatively speaking, but more oak than you normally could. And if you're smart about assessing your quality of fruit relative to your oak regime and your winemaking regime, you can make fantastic wine every year. You may not make, stellar 100-point wine every year, because Mother Nature gives you what Mother Nature would give you. But you absolutely can make great wine, and that's what the great estates will do. And this is a great example of a producer that absolutely knew how much oak their wine could handle. And 10 months, I think, is perfect. It integrated enough of the spiciness and toastiness and kind of cinnamon, vanilla hints that you get certainly in the mid-palate and the finish, but it's still quite graceful. It's still quite elegant. It's still quite light on the palate. It's got a long finish, but it's not oily by any means. I think that the oak brought enough spice to just make this wine that much more interesting. And then again, if you look at the price point, I think it's a great value for the layers of complexity you get. My expectation for wine has oak is that it's kind of cranked up the notch of complexity. I don't want just to taste oak. I want it to be a component that's integrated. If you can only taste one component of a wine, then it's not balanced. And this is a wine I feel that is pretty well balanced. Are there any questions on this wine?
Is there malolactic fermentation in this?
My guess it would be yes. My guess would be I want to say, my palate says it's not, but based on what they've done with the wine, they wouldn't hold back on ML. I mean, if they've already put 10 months of oak and they've served lead, if they just made the decision to serve lead, they would have decided to do 100% ML, is my guess. I mean, it could be wrong, but I mean, it's, you know, they describe it as a premier Chassagne-Montrachet, which is a village in Burgundy, which you find, you know, selling for $50+. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I think it is quite a nice wine.